So you might have seen this video.
The Democrats want the ceasefire.
That's former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi after getting into her car before leaving her home. She got into a shouting match with pro-Palestinian protesters. She tells them to go back to China where your headquarters are. What does she mean exactly? What is she talking about? Why would pro-Palestinian protesters from the United States go to China? Well, these pro-Palestine protesters come from an organization called Code Pink. Now, if that name sounds familiar to you, well, they've been around during protests against CCP hearings on Capitol Hill, as seen here, putting up signs that sound exactly like a CCP talking point. And that video is apparently from October last year, but was just recently surfaced. What exactly is Code Pink? Well, they deny ties to the CCP, but their actions are all in sync with Communist China's talking points, such as being pro-Palestine, pro-Russia, and pro-China. Now, the name already sounds like something out of a CCP organization. Little Pinks, Code Pinks, all about protecting communist national interests. The New York Times in August did a deep dive on this organization's founders and their extremely close ties to China. Behind this massive narrative warfare to benefit China are two people, Jody Evans and Neville Singham. Let's first talk about Jody Evans. Code Pink fronts as an all-women activist group, and they focus on so-called ending wars, ending social injustices, etc. It was founded in 2002, mainly focusing against the Iraq War. Its co-founder, Jody Evans, was featured in an interview with CCP state media, the Global Times. And just like its founders, Evans advocates for the friendliness with China. She is a former Democratic political advisor. Now, Code Pink in 2021 was defending the Chinese government's policies on Hong Kong, comparing Hong Kong's pro-democracy demonstrators to the January 6th protesters.
There's a lot of parallels between right-wing fascist movements, including the riots on the US Capitol on January 6th. And the riots in Hong Kong, which a lot of people are not aware of.
In fact, until 2015, Evans was critical of the CCP. She posted to Twitter demanding China stop repression of women. She later also posted on Instagram a photo with the Chinese dissident Ai Weiwei. So what changed? Well, she met Neville Singham, a Maoism worshipper and a Marxist with lots of money, as described by former associates. And this is from 2021 in London. Words like stop anti-Asian hate, no China bashing, no new Cold War, etc. These are common slogans used by these pro-CCP groups worldwide. And they sound like it's all about harmony and human rights, but in reality are just talking points by the CCP, used by fools like these useful idiots in the West into believing that they're actually fighting against a cause, against racism or sexism, when in fact, the very government that they're protecting is probably the most sexist and probably the one that is violating all of the human rights in the world. Now, this was done by a group called No Cold War, and just like Code Pink, they also advocate for China's talking points. And this organization also links to Neville Singham. Now, Neville is an American IT executive and billionaire. Now, according to the New York Times investigation, they found that these organizations are a part of a lavishly funded influence campaign, and that defends China and pushes its propaganda. So it turns out in 2017, Jody Evans married Singham, and in the wedding, which was taking place in Jamaica at the time, was a who's who of progressivism. Photos from the event show Amy Goodman, host of Democracy Now!, Ben Cohen, co-founder of Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, and V, the playwright formerly known as Eve Ensler, who wrote the Vagina monologues. Since 2017, about a quarter of Code Pink's funding or donations, more than 1.4 million US dollars, have actually come from two groups linked to Mr. Singham. Now, Singham gives money through a system that concealed his giving. Now, at the center of it are four nonprofits with dusty, dry names by the New York Times called United Community Fund or Justice and Education Fund. And according to them, they almost have no real-world footprints, and their listing of their addresses only as UPS store mailboxes in Illinois, Wisconsin, and New York. Now, the New York Times calls them the UPS funds. Now, this is again from the New York Times, saying here that because American nonprofit groups do not need to disclose individual donors, these four nonprofits worked like a financial geyser, throwing out a shower of money from an invisible source. Now, in their public findings, none of that lists Mr. Singham as a board member or a donor. He also said in statements saying that he doesn't control these organizations and saying that he has been known to share his opinions. Now, Code Pink gets money from one of these UPS store fundings, as well as a charity that Goldman Sachs offers as a conduit for clients' giving. And Mr. Singham, of course, has used that in the past. So from defending China's persecution of the Uyghurs, they say things like calling the Uyghurs the terrorists, to saying things that the United States is oppressive, saying that if they destroy China, it's going to be an oppression, to straight up saying that this is Evans, can't think of anything negative about China except having a hard time using their phone apps. Now, Miss Evans has clearly shown that with money, her opinions and her ideology was swayed or changed overnight. Basically, now she's talking for the wrong side just because of the amount of money that was given. And both Code Pink and Evans deny funding from the Chinese government. Code Pink and Jody Evans are just a piece of this bigger puzzle. Singham is actually the real issue here. His claws extend from Africa to Asia to America and to Europe. Now, here's an Indian media report about his ties to spreading pro-China voice in the country. In 2021, India's Enforcement Directorate named Singham in a money laundering case, alleging that he was the source of $5 million given to an Indian news site called People's Dispatch between 2018 to 2021. And that site was used to promote a pro-Chinese narrative in the Indian media space. There's also a report of him being involved in South Africa. Several times a year, activists and politicians from across Africa would fly to South Africa for a boot camp put on by the Nkrumah School, which is set in the popular safari area in South Africa. Here, they're actually fed Chinese propaganda, brochures, and materials of all sorts. Now, so according to the New York Times, U.S. tax records show that one of the UPS store nonprofits, the People's Support Foundation, donated at least $450,000 for training at that school. On Instagram, Ms. Evans described a photo of the grounds as, quote, as Roy's new place. This $450,000 was just part of Singham's effort to basically influence South Africa. In all, the foundation has sent about $5.6 million to groups that run the school, a news organization, and the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party, which is a fringe party that was launched ahead of the 2019 election in South Africa. And he's also been involved in places like Brazil and the UK as well. Singham has long worked with or alongside the Chinese government. From 2001 to 2008, he worked for Huawei as a strategic consultant, and by then he had founded a Chicago-based company called ThoughtWorks, which directly ties to influencing Huawei, among other sort of social work. His real work, however, didn't start until 2016 to 2017, around the time that he met Jody Evans, in terms of influencing or talking about a pro-China stance. And Huawei was, of course, a primary technological weapon of the CCP to conquer global communications. From early on, he was already in love with China, or should I say the Chinese regime, because, of course, he was a beneficiary of the CCP. He has continued to bank on Chinese development, and he has invested in two companies in the country's consultancy and food industries. One is called Shanghai Luoweisheng, with a registered capital contribution for about $20 million, and Gondwana Foods with about $32.5 million. Now, Singham is also listed as the legal representative of a third company called Shanghai Shenong Company Limited, and that was registered in January of 2020. Neville Singham lives in Shanghai, and the headquarters that Pelosi is referring to in the video is actually shared office space with communist propaganda departments. One outlet in his network is also co-producing a YouTube show financed in part by the city's propaganda department. Two others are working with a Chinese university to, quote, spread China's voice to the world. And last month, Mr. Singham even joined a Communist Party workshop about promoting the party internationally. His office in Shanghai shares floor space with a company called Maku Media. Here's one of their photos, which actually features a banner that says, always follow the lead of the party. And you can tell that their mission is to tell the China story well. And that's all you need to know about what type of a media company Maku is and what the reason why they're sharing an office space. And here's a photo showing Singham attending a study session by the CCP, taking notes from a communist red journal. And this event was even hosted by Fudan University, one of the breeding grounds for CCP politicians and its goons. And this May, Mr. Singham also attended the opening of a media institute in Shanghai, and organizers disputed these tote bags reading "Communication as a Solidarity." So, using a front of far-left groups in the United States and other Western countries, they remotely control these protesters to participate in counter-protests or demonstrations at important hearings about the CCP, or attend so-called peace protests, harass politicians, and call for ceasefires. In reality, they're just speaking on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. And they're basically what the CCP uses to amplify pro-China voices overseas, not using Chinese people, but using the domestic residents, those that grew up in that country, born there as well, to speak on behalf of China. How Singham has operated is by using his money to buy influence and to control think tanks, media, grassroots organizations, charities that work with each other in sync to amplify propaganda from China. In my view, it is very likely that the CCP also pumps money into his work. He is being financially supported by the Chinese regime to do this type of work. All right, that's it today for the episode on what exactly is Code Pink and why Pelosi was right to yell at them to go back to China. If you enjoyed the content, leave a like, comment below your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time, bye-bye.